Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special episode of College Admissions Toolbox in conjunction with Admissions Uncovered. This is a special joint episode, a meeting of the minds between myself, Steve Schwartz, and my good friend, Michael Gao.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for connecting, Mike. So I thought it would be cool for us to do this joint episode because we actually have quite a bit in common. We both have experience related to Columbia. I went there for undergrad and you're currently there. Is that right?
That's right. I'm a freshman there at Columbia right now.
Oh, awesome. Wow. So you really just went through the admissions process a very short time ago.
Yeah, very literally. Just got into Columbia, just got into college, and I guess that's why I'm so interested in it. I have a lot of thoughts about college admissions now.
Yeah, I'm sure. And Columbia in particular, I'm wondering what your first impressions are as just getting into this.
Well, I really love the school, and the city is amazing too. I grew up in suburban Dallas, so New York City is a lot more interesting than that. And I try to get off campus at least once a week. I know a lot of students, say, "Oh, I have a lot of work, staying on the weekends," but I feel like since we're in New York City, it's what we should do. But what did you think about Columbia?
Oh man, I loved it. It was even better than I thought it would be, to be honest. And I think Columbia is kind of a love it or hate it kind of thing, I think, in part because of the core curriculum. If you're in the Columbia College, then you're doing like a third of your classes are somewhat dictated by the core curriculum. And that means you're going to do a lot of reading, especially freshman year at literature humanities, great classic works of literature. And then, of course, sophomore year, you have contemporary civilization with great works of philosophy. And that's a lot of reading, and it's not for everybody.
Oh, for sure. Honestly, I'm not too keen on literature humanities, and I think it also has to do with who your teacher is, who your classmates are, because it is a seminar style class. And if the other students aren't that interesting or don't talk, then the seminar class doesn't really work. But I am really excited for contemporary civilization because I think the philosophy angle to it, more macro political philosophy, is definitely something I'm more interested in than just, the stories and literature humanities.
Yeah, sure. It's really interesting though, I think, because it kind of gives everyone in the college this common basis for relating to each other, right? Like you might be a pre-med major, someone else is pre-law, someone else is economics, but you're all still somewhat fluent in these great works of literature, like maybe Crime and Punishment, or maybe just the Bible, right? Or then getting to sophomore year, you've got philosophy with Kant and Nietzsche and so on. And so it kind of creates this interesting thing where even if someone is not one of the 20 or so in your seminar class, you still have several hundred other people who are going through the exact same experience, whether it's enjoying it or whether it's just kind of being unhappy about doing all that reading.
We definitely complain about the reading all the time. I'm actually majoring in economics. What did you graduate with?
I majored in political science, which I think those are two of the most popular majors at the college, right?
I think me too.
Yeah, they are the two. I think econ's number one and poli-sci is number two.
Sounds about right.
It's funny because, poli-sci, there's obviously a natural relation to these works, which is why I think I like them so much. Like philosophy, especially, there's a lot of its political philosophy, like how should government be structured? Sure. Sophomore year, you have Rousseau, you have Hobbes, you have John Locke, I believe, as well. So there's a lot going on related to government. But then in literature humanities could maybe be good for the English folks. But then econ, of course, there's not that much of a connection except for maybe Adam Smith, right?
I'm also interested in politics. Maybe there's an econ poli-sci joint degree now, and so I'm maybe looking into that, which is why I think contemporary civilization appeals a bit more to me.
Yeah, very cool. Maybe it'd be useful for folks who are considering Columbia if we talked about some of the other things involved in the core curriculum, and then, of course, the other stuff going on. So literature humanities, and contemporary civilization are the two biggest ones that everyone is taking. Then there's a few others that folks are taking as well. And I think things have actually changed a little bit since I was there. I know there's a science class that was not required back when I was there. I didn't actually take this, but could you share a bit on that?
Yeah. So I don't want to make too big of a deal about this since this is really just like a one semester. It's a very easy class. It's called Frontiers of Science. And Columbia's pitch on it is basically that in high school, in a lot of science classes, we're taught formulas, equations, we're taught to pump in numbers, spit out numbers, do the mechanics of experiments. And Columbia says that's not really the point of a science class. The point of a science class is to teach you the habits of mind of a scientist. Things like calculating with units, estimation, just kind of the big macro level principles behind a lot of scientific inquiry. That's their pitch on it. As someone who just went through it last semester, I got to say it's not as they say, because what they do is they split up the course into 4 sections. So we learn 4 different disciplines, but we only have 3 lectures per discipline. So 3 lectures for the brain, 3 lectures for astrophysics, 3 lectures for biodiversity, 3 lectures for climate change. And obviously that's not enough to get, 3 lectures on astrophysics. You're not going to know astrophysics. And so even when they try talking about the habits of mind of a scientist, that, sounds good in principle, but, in reality, when you're talking about calculating with units and, estimation, it's a lot of the things that you'd expect someone to have coming into the college. And frankly, a lot of people do have it. And I think this isn't, I feel like I've shared these feelings with a lot of other students going through the class, which is that it's a little bit tedious, a little bit too simple, if you get what I'm saying.
I got, back when I was at the college, they were piloting this. And so I think only a third of students were doing it. The other 2/3 of college students could kind of fulfill their science requirement with virtually anything. So I actually took what I thought would be the easiest science classes, because science was not my thing. So I took biodiversity and I took psychology. And those, at least with those, you can go a bit deeper. I feel like 3 lectures on each topic, you might as well just go on YouTube and you can go far deeper, right?
Exactly. I mean, the lecturers are really engaging and everything, but 3 lectures per topic doesn't get you much.
Right. And then there's also the writing class.
The writing class, yeah.
Yeah, where you're kind of workshopping your writing and you're evaluating different pieces of writing and then kind of reflecting on them. What's that like for you?
It's interesting in the sense that it's a lot more writing than I'm used to from high school, I guess, because, you're spitting out a paper basically every 3 weeks. It's a very quick turnaround time for me. And I think one thing that my teacher at least does really well is that instead of just focusing on the mechanics of writing, instead of just focusing on things like grammar and like make sure you have transition words and things like that, he actually does talk a lot about the material that we're writing about, which is, I think, what makes the class a bit more interesting.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. I remember another thing I loved about Columbia when it comes to writing is that they actually had this writing center you could go to. And I feel like a lot of students don't I got the sense that you take advantage of this, but not enough students do. And I found it to be such a useful resource. Like whenever I had any paper, I would just bring it to them and sit down. They would mark it all up for me and give me suggestions. And then as a result of that, I could turn in much better papers and my professor was none the wiser, but it was also totally above board. So it was really a cool bonus there.
Absolutely. It is an amazing resource. And I definitely agree with you. Not enough people know about it and use it, but it's also true that there's just too few writing consultants, for budgetary reasons or, whatever reason. And it's always packed in there. So it's difficult to get an appointment, but whenever I do get an appointment, I know my essays are better for it.
Yeah, definitely. It's the sort of thing you really have to book far in advance. And like, obviously people don't always do papers months in advance, right? So it's kind of like, you have to just say, okay, like my deadline is Friday. So I'm going to book an appointment on like Monday or Tuesday. So I have some time to incorporate the feedback.
The writing center director actually told me that the openings open up about a week in advance. So he was like, maybe just stay up until midnight and when it opens. Which is a very Columbia thing to recommend, I feel.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's like you just have to like set your alarm or something.
Yeah.
That's so funny. That's so funny. I know that at Columbia, there's always a lot of talk about, there's always controversies on campus. They're always talking about changing the core curriculum. They were certainly talking about that back when I was there. Is that still a big topic on campus, I gather?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm sure you've heard about the Julian von Abel kind of like racist person outside of Butler Library screaming awful things to African-American students. And that really did spark a debate on campus about whether, the readings we do, in the core curriculum were tied to that or somehow caused that. And I think it's an interesting debate. I'm not entirely sure what side I come down on it, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, to be honest, I'm not living it on campus. And so I can speak better to like what I've experienced in the past in terms of like controversies. I remember back when I was there was a lot of controversy over Middle Eastern Studies Department, MILAC, about is about, Israel versus Palestine and the Arab world and all that. And so there's always lots of controversies. I think that ultimately it's just part of what makes Columbia, Columbia. Even back in the 60s and 70s, their students took over the campus back in 68.
Oh, for sure.
And they barricaded, all the gates. They went into the president's office. It was nuts. There's a great book on this called The Strawberry Statement that was written by a journalist back at that time who actually lived through the protests and was there on campus. And it's a fascinating read just to get a sense of Columbia's culture, because I think that culture of protest and revolt and controversy and challenging bureaucracy, I think it stems from that. And of course, it continues all the way through to this day. I feel like Columbia is always in the news, especially here in New York. The local media, the Post, the Times, the Daily News, they all love to pick it up and kind of make headlines out of it. And I think that part of that is because what happens on college campuses does ultimately trickle down to like the wider culture, right? Because these are people who then go on to take positions in government, in journalism, and in politics. I've seen a lot of my classmates go on to positions at places like the New York Times. Yeah. And so I think that controversy, it's certainly not for everybody, but you can disengage from it. I think there's enough students on campus who don't really care and they're kind of doing their own thing. I think there's a small vocal minority who always want to challenge things and make issues out of that. And that's their place to do that. But I think that at the same time, if you don't want that, you can definitely find common cause with students who'd rather focus on their academics or focus on other things altogether. I think maybe the poli-sci students and the econ students are more into this, but then like the pre-meds, the science folks, the math folks, they're totally disengaged from this for the most part, from what I see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case for most schools. I feel like when we talk about touring schools, choosing schools, there's a lot of discussion about, you're fit for the school. And I get that type of word, but I also think that as someone who just went through this, kind of like did the thought process of deciding between schools, it's like all these schools have everything because they're just so big. And I think it's fair to say that Columbia definitely has a bigger kind of activist bent, being in New York City, being kind of in the edge of Harlem and gentrified Morningside Heights and the upper West and East Side. I think it is the intersection of a lot of places where you might see a lot of controversy. But again, like all schools, you don't have to do it if you don't want to.
Of course, I think also, students are young, 18 to 22, right? That's the point at which you want to change things. People often who are politically engaged want to protest, want to advocate for things. And that's to be expected virtually anywhere. And Columbia, I think, gets a lot of headlines. But again, it's very easy to avoid that if you want to. Yeah, I think what ends up ultimately being more relevant for students will be, of course, the location in the city. Lots of options, although I think myself and a lot of other students tended not to leave campus very much. Heights bubble, but if you want to, of course, you can go out downtown, and you can also go do internships in Midtown if you want to as well, or even go as far as Brooklyn if you want.
Yeah. Internships are a little bit harder. I don't know if they had it when you were there, but now Fridays are off, which is amazing.
Altogether completely.
Just, some people have classes, discussion seminars, whatever, but most students have it completely off.
Yeah, I usually didn't have Friday classes. I might have like a Spanish at 9 a.m. on a Friday, which was not fun, but for the most part, Fridays were open.
Which is very nice, because then your weekend starts a little bit earlier on Thursday night.
Yeah, you go out Thursday night, and then maybe if you have an internship Friday downtown, you can do that if you want.
Exactly. I don't think I'll be doing internships during the school year, just because I know it's going to get busy, and I don't know if I'll be able to juggle it with the internship. But if anybody is in New York City or is going to Columbia listening to this, please, please, please do get off campus. Challenge yourself to do it. I know sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you have a lot to do, but you're in New York City, and I love going off campus.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's definitely something to take advantage of. It is a unique opportunity. Think of the students virtually anywhere else in the country who don't have these opportunities. And you go somewhere, you say, I'm a Columbia undergrad, that will open doors. That name on a resume it does make a difference. And so those opportunities are available to you, even though you do have to take maybe a half-hour subway ride down to Midtown.
Absolutely.
It's worth it for sure, though. I think that, let's see what else. Where was I going to go with this? Another thing I was thinking about is that ultimately what I think does set Columbia apart that students should be aware of is the core curriculum, which is why I led with that. In contrast to a school like Brown, that's completely open.
The
And
open
they're both
curriculum.
Ivies. They're both Ivies. They're both obviously open a lot of doors. But if requirements or reading are not your thing, then Columbia might not be the place for you.
Yeah. I will say that I do think Columbia's core gets a little bit overhyped. It's not the case that you don't get any choice of your classes, right? So for me, this first semester, I had to do literature, humanities, and frontiers of science or university writing, because frontiers of science and writing kind of flip depending on what semester you take it first in, right? But you have between 4 and 5 classes to choose from, which means you have 3 classes to pick yourself. So for people maybe thinking about Columbia, I wouldn't get too afraid that you're not going to be able to choose your classes, because you definitely are. And frankly, a lot of schools, Brown being one of the only exceptions I know of, have general education requirements, distributional requirements. So at any school you're going to have certain requirements you have to fill.
That is absolutely correct. I could not agree more. Yeah. So I focus on this because some people walk in on day one. I remember my brother's also a Columbia alum, actually. And so he was doing some alum interviews and found that like there were people walking into the interview who had no idea what the core curriculum was.
Ooh,
and
that's not good.
That did not make a good impression, of course. And so I think that you walk in, you don't want to be surprised by that. You want to be aware of it. But yeah, I agree. Although overall, I think the credits related to the core curriculum comprise maybe a third of your classes overall, you do have freedom. Some
Absolutely.
classes are required no matter what, like we discussed, but then there are more distributional requirements. Like I said, for science, I was able to choose biodiversity and psychology because I thought those would play more to my strengths. And then, of course, there's major cultures requirements where you have a lot of freedom. You can choose if you want to do Latin America, you can do that. If you want to do Middle East, you can do Middle East. If you want to do East Asia, you could do East Asia. And so there's a lot of different options there. You can pick what you want. You can also look up professor reviews. So you do have quite a bit of freedom there. Then, of course, there's art and music as well. But again, I do think they are a fairly small percentage, and you end up having plenty of space for electives.
Oh, absolutely. And, even so for example, there's also a language requirement. You get to choose the language. So,
Yeah.
There is a structure that you have to follow, which I think is the case at most schools, but you get so much flexibility within that structure. It's very nice.
Yeah. But then there's also the swimming requirement, right?
The swimming requirement. What a joke.
Oh my God, it's crazy.
The story, I think, why C's doesn't have to do it always cracks me up.
Yeah. You want to share that?
Yeah, so I think 1980s or something, a Columbia College kid got mad and asked why C's kids didn't have to do the swimming test, and the C's kids responded, because if we ever have to cross the Hudson, it's because we can build a boat to do
right.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I guess is probably true, hopefully.
Yeah, I would hope so. By the end of 4 years at Columbia with engineering, you could at least build something that a life raft get you across, right?
I guess that the one thing that brings to mind, the different schools, Columbia College C's, is what do you think about the relationship between Columbia and Barnard? Because that's another one of those things that always gets heated up on campus. Oh,
yeah. I mean, there's always a little bit of like friendly tension or rivalry between the schools. And it's funny. I think ultimately, though, it's like funny to joke about it sometimes, but I think it's actually kind of cool because you then have this sister school right across the street that has a ton of other stuff going on too. Like Columbia kids can take classes there and vice versa. Their extracurriculars are also open to Columbia students as well. And so it's kind of like expanding your world, which I think is pretty cool. And Columbia has many other things going on too. There's also JTS, there's the Jewish Theological Seminary, there's the Teachers College. And of course, if you're in the college, there's also C's as well. And so it creates this whole network of options where it's beyond just Columbia College itself, if that's what you're going for. And then you even have the chance to take grad level classes at, for example, the School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA. And then I think other grad schools as well, you do have some options there. And so I think it's nice. I think it only benefits everyone to have that crossover and that cross-pollination and the opportunity to expand beyond just the reaches of the campus. Although I think the campus offers so much that you don't even need to go beyond if you don't want to.
The new library on Barnard's campus is very nice, though, the Milstein Library. So I definitely go there quite a bit. The other thing that I hear a lot sometimes from Columbia College C's kids is that, the acceptance rate at Barnard is so high, which means they got to sneak their way into an Ivy League education. And to me, it just feels so like irrelevant, good for them. They're
Yeah,
going to go to
totally.
a school. They're going to have the Ivy League name on their diploma. That's awesome. I mean, I don't think there's a trade-off. I don't think like more Barnard kids dilutes the influence of Columbia's name or anything like that. Yeah, so I think when people say that, I think they're they're either joking or they're taking things a little bit too seriously.
Agreed. And that's why I didn't even go there. It's been so long, but I definitely remember making a lot of those immature jokes back in the day. And it's like, but ultimately, come on, like really, it's not taking anything away from you. Columbia is an Ivy League. Barnard is not hurting Columbia's ranking. Their admissions are calculated separately. And so I think it's not a big deal. I mean, just be happy that you have these other options available to you. And those students, I mean, they definitely have, I think Barnard definitely has a certain type of student they want to admit.
Yeah.
It does tend to be students who can bring something unique to the Columbia experience. If you have Barnard students in your class, they might have a different take on things. They might have different contributions to make. And I think it's,
for sure,
it's ultimately helpful to everyone to have that viewpoint diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool. And it's just a hop, skip, and a jump away. It's right across the street. You can walk there.
Literally. You just walk across the street, go get to the Starbucks, walk a little bit north, and then you're at Barnard's campus.
Yeah, exactly. And then I remember I did take some classes at SEPA. I did take classes related to Teachers College, and they definitely have their own unique flavor as well that I thought was really cool. Like when I was at SEPA, I felt like I was going to be meeting diplomats, like because they're coming there and speaking all the time. And that was super cool. And I think if you're going to a college where that's not affiliated with a university, you do miss out on that. There are benefits too, but I think it's good to consider if you want to go into government, you want to do things at the UN or in like this nation's capital. I think that having that exposure to SEPA events will definitely help.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind, Columbia has this for sure, but several other universities too, UChicago comes to mind, are things like 5-year joint programs where you start your master's degree your senior year, kind of do half-half, and then the 5th year you finish up your master's. So you can graduate with both a bachelor's degree and a master's in international affairs or public policy, your MPA. There's even like that type of sub-matriculation type program with the law school. So a 6-year JD program, I think it is.
Yeah, so 3 and 3, yeah.
3 and 3.
Yeah.
So there's so many opportunities at one of these big schools. It is the case that, you're going to have big lectures because that's just how things have to work at a big school. But there are also so many opportunities that you wouldn't get at a liberal arts school that, doesn't have grad programs, for instance.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the joint programs are super cool. If you want to have your grad school guaranteed, there are programs that can allow you to do that. And of course, if you love Columbia so much you don't want to leave, that's a great option.
I guess one thing I wonder is, as an alumni, a few years out from Columbia, how do you think the core has impacted you? Has it impacted the direction of your career? How you act on a day-to-day basis, or is it just something you do at school?
That's always a great question. We always used to joke that this stuff is good for nothing but cocktail parties, right?
Yeah.
To sound intelligent, like, oh, I've read Kant, I've read Rousseau, like Dostoevsky and all that.
Remember
and I
that
think
scene in the Iliad.
Right. And I think that it does really give you a level of cultural fluency. I mean, so many of these works have informed our culture, and they contain certain timeless messages and certain timeless stories that I think they may not be actively relevant in your everyday life and career, but I think that I do think that honestly, the concepts that they raise and the fact that these works of literature and philosophy are referenced in our culture and even in popular culture, I think is very useful just in making you a well-rounded person. And I think that a strictly practical education that only focuses on like a trade school, that would be the flip side of that, right? Where you only study what's directly relevant. I think that would lead you to miss out on something, and it might be practical in the short term. But over the long term, I think that having exposure to these works fairly early in life, when you're just 18, 20 years old, I think does have an enormous degree of usefulness, because it will carry forward through the rest of your career. And listen, when you're looking to get a job, you're looking to network, being able to talk about things beyond the directly relevant day to day, I think is useful if you want to make a connection with someone, especially if it's a fellow Columbia alum. Like I said, beyond just the 20 folks in your seminar, you have this shared common ground with every alum as well. So let's say you're interviewing in front of a Columbia alum, you can both joke about the core curriculum, you can joke about the books and stuff, and you have that common shared interest already.
Yeah, absolutely. And when there's something called Odyssey mentoring nights now at Columbia, where undergraduates can meet with alumni of the college and Cs. And that's a great way to start the conversation is, what did you think about the core? Did you take CC, Lit Hum, that type of thing? So absolutely, I think it's a great way to connect with alumni as well. And I guess to go a little bit big picture and to further defend the core in liberal art education, I think there is something to be said that education isn't just meant for training you to be a banker or to be some type of executive or something like that. It's also meant to train you to be a citizen in a democracy. And there's only so much that reading stock graphs will get you to be a well-rounded citizen. You have to do more. You have to think about the world in a bigger context other than in just your one little niche area. So, I think it's a difference of opinion on what education ought to be. But to me, it really is something bigger than just, let's make sure you have a job after campus.
Agreed. And I also think that there's something to be said for challenging students. So not just getting to choose whatever you want, choosing your own adventure, because you might play only to your strengths and might not grow as much as a result. If you put yourself in these challenging situations, and also that could potentially open up new doors, that could change the entire course of your career. I mean, how many people enter on day one listing undecided as their major, or how many people change their majors 2, 3, 4 times, right? Yeah. You don't always know what you're going to want to do freshman year when you're 17, 18 years old. And maybe exposure to art hum or art humanities or music humanities or major cultures or the writing or the core curriculum, that could change where you want to go.
Yeah. I mean, for me, because there is some flexibility in this semester, because I gotten some of the core requirements out of the way, is that I was able to take a Java class. And I didn't do any computer science before. I know like a little bit of HTML. And when I tell computer programmers that, they're like, that's not real programming. Right? So taking the Java class is really interesting to me. It's challenging because I haven't taken a computer science class before, but I think it's interesting. And I don't know, because I do have a few more class slots, I might be taking more computer science classes. And that's the beauty of going to a school that has a lot of different things, and a school that isn't siloed off, right? So for a lot of public universities, UT, for example, I'm from Texas, that's my state school. You apply into a school, you apply into the business school, you apply into the nursing school, you apply into the School of Natural Sciences, and you're kind of locked into that school, can't take classes out of it. And to me, that's not, it's just not attractive to me, because going into college, I knew I wanted to try out a few different things before saying, I want to spend the rest of my life doing this one thing.
Yeah, exactly. As we said, Columbia has so much opportunity for crossover into other domains, other colleges, other niches. And I think it really is enormously valuable. And like we said, the core is somewhat of a requirement, but you also have so much freedom in your schedule to take these Java classes. I took classes in a wide variety of areas, and maybe going outside my comfort zone hurt my GPA a little bit.
Yeah.
I still did learn in the process. And I think that was really valuable. You do have the room in your schedule, and it is possible to, if you want to load yourself up on classes a bit, you can even open up more room for additional electives. Like you can take 5, 6, 7 classes a semester if you want to. You might need to talk to your dean to get the approval on that. But if you're willing to buckle down and focus, you can do that. I remember one semester I took 21 credits, and it was actually my GPA actually went up, surprisingly, because I was so focused. I knew I couldn't mess around. I couldn't goof off and spend too much time socializing, because I just got super into study mode, and that actually was really useful to me. And I also did the flip side where I took only 4 classes and I socialized a lot more that semester, but there's benefits to both, right?
Yeah. And, you have 8 semesters there, so you can have one down semester and one super hyper-focused semester as well.
And then I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier about the large intro classes. And I just wanted to clarify for some folks that although Columbia does have big lecture hall classes, you will have classes with maybe 100-200 people if it's an intro 101, like prerequisite class from like the beginning of your major. But as you move on, they'll get smaller and smaller. If you take like 2,000 level, 3,000 level, and 4,000 level, even if you go to the grad level, they'll get much smaller very quickly. And you can always go to office hours. And I recommend that, whether it's with your TA or your professor. And the professors at Columbia were actually, I found, very accessible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And again, like the writing center, not enough students take advantage, right?
Yeah, and so to jump off on that, I think it's very true. Like a lot of people talk badly about big lecture classes, but that's just kind of how learning is at some point. At some point, you just need to sit down, have someone tell you the information, and then you go home and kind of like figure it out on your own. And if you have questions, go to things like office hours and recitations. I also went to Swarthmore's like I think their fly-in program for interested high school seniors, and they're a very small liberal arts school, and they don't have big lecture classrooms. They only have, I think, one lecture hall in the entire campus. But when I sat into one of those econ seminar type things, it was still the teacher writing on the board the equations and talking to the students, just like it is now. The difference is now there's just more people in the class. So the only trade-off is that you can't ask questions, but even that's sometimes not true. Like my econ professor is very open to us kind of like raising our hands during the lecture. So I honestly think the distinction between big schools and small schools gets a little bit overplayed sometimes. I think it really is just about, does the school have what you want it to, professor-wise, major-wise, research opportunity-wise? And if it does, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I agree. I think that ultimately the size of the school will more not dictate the style of education quite so much as it will dictate the other things like extracurriculars, socializing. So if you're going to a tiny liberal arts college, things will kind of, it'll feel like maybe a high school part two if you went to a smaller high school where everybody knows everybody, you see each other all the time, versus a larger school where you could be somewhat anonymous on campus. And I felt like Columbia, for me at least, was the perfect balance, because I would see this, I would run into somebody I knew every day walking across campus, even several people, but I would also run into many people who I did not know. I would see lots of unfamiliar faces as well. And so it was a good mix where I could be anonymous if I wanted to. You could put your hoodie up and kind of slink off to the library if you want to, but you can also be friendly and you run into people you know all the time. So you never really feel alone or isolated. And also I think the fact that 99% of students are living on campus also really helps to make it a good community feel, where if you're living in one of the two major freshman dorms like John Jay or Carmen, you'll always have a community. You'll always have somebody to go to breakfast or lunch with if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's a cliche that a lot of admissions officers say, but I think it's very true, that you can make a big school small, but you can't make a small school big. Makes sense to me. I've lived it. It's very true. So,
yeah.
Don't worry too much about that distinction, I feel like.
Yeah, definitely agreed. Anything else you think we should cover related to Columbia before we wrap this up?
No, I think that's about it. I might have more thoughts about Columbia after this semester, but we'll see. After my Java final.
Well, maybe we could do a follow-up then.
Awesome.
All right, well, Mike, this was a lot of fun. For folks who are looking to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, so I do a college admissions podcast called Admissions Uncovered. I do it with two, right now, high school seniors, so they also just went through the process. And so we're over at admissionsuncovered.com. We talk a lot about the mechanics of getting into college, but I think it's we add in some relatable stories because we all literally just went through the process, and it's a lot of fun. So we're at admissionsuncovered.com.
Great. And that's really cool that you're kind of living the experience and doing it fresh. For folks who are looking to connect with me, I'm at collegeadmissionstoolbox.com. I have the College Admissions Toolbox podcast available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere else, as I know Admissions Uncovered is as well. And I have a mix of interviews as well as shorter bite-sized topical episodes, typically even only like 2 to 5 minutes, covering a topic super quickly for those who are pressed for time.
Awesome. Well, it was awesome talking to you. Awesome talking to Columbia alumni.
Yeah, and great to connect with a current Columbia student. Brings me back.
All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for doing this, and thanks for listening.